terms of my background, I was born in Canada. My ancestors are originally from Ukraine. They escaped communism, came to Canada, starting new lives. I have a twin sister. So the way that we were raised by our parents was very much, we can do anything, women can do anything, girls can do anything. So we followed in the footsteps of my dad. He's an engineer with his MBA. I went into business. My sister went into engineering. And then we're really inspired by my mom, who started 3, 4, 5 businesses while we were growing up. So it's no wonder that I'm investing in SMEs and doing it in a country that my ancestors are from. And I would say this, Ukraine came first and then came private equity. I was always interested in investing as a young girl. I was looking at stocks, I was working, I was investing in buying, ounces of gold and reading the Wealthy Barber and all kinds of books that I could get my hands on. And when I came to Ukraine, I really took it to a whole new level. So originally my background is as a CPA. I came to Ukraine with my grandmother in 1993. At the time, that the Soviet Union was not open. You could not travel to the Soviet Union before it started to really fall apart in the early 90s. And I wanted to come with my grandmother as soon as it could open. I did that, fell in love with the country, and decided to pursue my career, my passion, my interests in a country that was just developing from scratch. So that's really how I got into Ukraine. And when I came to Ukraine with my grandmother and came back, I marched into the managing partner's office over at Coopers & Lybrand, where I was working, and said, I'm moving to Ukraine. Barry said, that's crazy. In 1 week, you won't be interested in doing that. And I said, watch me. And in a week, I had 2 job offers. And I happened to find a very interesting technology fund that was investing in taking former Soviet military technologies, putting them into baseball bats. So taking titanium alloys, aluminum scandium alloys, putting them into baseball bats and lightweight bikes and interesting commercial applications. And I was hired by them, flew over to Ukraine in December 1993, and the rest is history. What attracted me to Ukraine was the people, was their warmth, their kindness, their talent, the way they really take you into their home, into their family, the way they're very direct. They reveal everything that's going on for them, and having that sincerity, that genuine approach. I liked it. And then looking at what the country could be, and thinking that how often in your life do you have such a monumental event happen, like the Berlin Wall falling and all of these republics that were closed to the world coming to market and developing into market economies. That was exciting for me. I thought, this does not happen. It is serendipity that it's happened at a point in my lifetime in the 20s when I felt that I had enough education and skills to bring to the table. At the same time, a lot of energy, and I wanted to be part of that transition. So, it was David, it was mind blowing. I mean, it was, there's no computers, there's no roads, there's bread lines, there's lines for everything. You would just see a line and you would get into the line because everyone's standing in the line. So it was, hyperinflation. It was just night and day compared to the world that I had grown up in and that I'd lived in. But for me, I could see what it could be. I could see that this was the beginning, yet at the same time, this country would transition, would transform, would go down this path. And of course, we all wanted to see a Poland story. We all wanted to see Ukraine develop very quickly and embrace the market principles and have a EU roadmap similar to Poland, but it's gone its own path. No EU roadmap, has had to limp along during some episodes in its in its history. At the same time, it goes back to the people. It's the power of the people and that strong drive, determination, real individualism is in the Ukrainian DNA. That freedom that you really do see that now with the tech entrepreneurs and this natural gravitation from math and science, technical education, and morphing that into starting a tech company and how far they've come, and that really coincides very nicely with that freedom-loving DNA that people have here. Basically, I was in a private consulting firm, and I was asked by the CEO at the time to join Western NS Enterprise Fund. And what really attracted me was the idea that we were spinning out and forming a separate private management company and following that same path that enterprise investors had embarked on so successfully in Poland. So that's what really brought me to Western NS, to the US government fund. And 4 of us founded Horizon Capital. It was the intersection of when Ukraine really started to hit the radar of investors, and that was back in 2003, 4, 5, with large international banks coming into the country, scooping up banking assets, and you did see this interest in the country that really was the first big interest. We at the time, one of our investors, and also he was the chairman of the investment committee for Western NS. He has spent over 35 years at Merrill Lynch, global investment banking. He retired just years ago in terms of as investment banking chairman, a global investment banking chairman, and he really believed in that concept of this is a ground floor opportunity, helped us with that first fund. And I think that's key for anyone who's raising a fund. That first fund is extremely important. So him opening up his Rolodex at the same time as us approaching both institutional investors, regional investors, international financial institutions, and really making sure that we could pull off the debut fund. That was critical. We intended to raise 100 million. We raised 132. 2 years later, we'd already deployed it within 2 years. We intended to raise 300. We raised 370. Then after the events of 2014-15, we intended to raise 150. We raised 200. So, and recently we raised a 270 million fund, and that puts us at 1.1 billion in assets under management. So for us, it was always about the deals. When you're talking about Ukraine, especially in this context, in many cases, if you look at companies, particularly tech companies, companies in the IT space, then really we're in a global world. We're in a digital world. You don't attach a geography to it. You can have founders from anywhere in the world, from Ukraine, from India, from the US, from Germany, from UK, anywhere in the world, from China. And they have a great idea, and often they may develop the concept, the product, go to market in their home country, but eventually they're going global. They're going global, and where they do it from is less important now versus in this space, in the tech space, versus if you're doing it, infrastructure investment. Looking at the historical context, looking at what we've gone through since 2014-15, of course, Ukraine lost 7% of its territory, 20% of its economic heartland, 20% of the output, the GDP output, the currency dropped 70% in terms of devaluation. So looking at 2014-15, and at that moment in time, it was very difficult. And in terms of the economy, the big drop, minus 20%, the GDP level. But what it did was force Ukraine to do 2 things. number one, to restructure its economy, which is very important. Move from largely commodities, metals, metallurgy, minerals, agro, and focus on value-added sectors, on processing, on IT sectors, on tech, etc., and obviously going higher up the value chain, and understand that the old kind of structure of the economy is not going to lead the country to prosperity in a post-2014, 2015 environment. What it also made Ukraine realize and finally do, which is something that we certainly have been watching and hoping for, is to pivot to the EU. Russia was Ukraine's number one trading partner. Now the EU is Ukraine's number one trading partner. If you look at where Ukraine is geographically, it neighbors EU countries. You've got this large trading bloc, and you've got Ukraine on the other side, being able to offer light manufacturing, exporting to the EU, food processing, food. Of course, everybody knows Ukraine is number one, and it's like grain, corn, sunflower in the top three. So they've made that pivot from markets that were their historical markets of choice, lower margin, lower pricing, but they're forced to make the pivot to EU post 2014-15 to make the investments, to get their productivity up, to improve their technology, to invest in marketing, etc. And it's paying off. It's paying off in terms of expansion of that trading relationship, and certainly for the kinds of companies that we back, then it's paying off because those are the markets that they're selling into. What as a GP, as a obviously a private fund manager, what is important is that we looked at our strategy, and our strategy had pivoted to IT, tech, export champions, because in any emerging market, you're always going to be looking at currency and macro risks. So we already had adopted an investment strategy where we saw a natural currency hedge for the kinds of companies that we were investing in. If you've got a cost basis in local currency and you're earning hard currency revenues globally, you're going to do well. And that really tested our strategy. We came through on the other side. We saw strength in our companies, strength in the investment strategy. The latest fund, it's top quartile across all measures. Adopting that strategy, we see that it works. And even it's interesting because what Ukraine went through made it more resilient. It had to get its macroeconomic house in order. It had to start pursuing structural reforms that they had avoided early on. And that got them lean and mean and ready for the COVID-19 pandemic, which Ukraine has gotten through in quite a resilient fashion. They were expected to have a -7% GDP drop last year, was -4. The economy's rebounded back to growth. And that was despite the fact that during the COVID pandemic, there was no fiscal stimulus. It was on the shoulders of business. There was no one is receiving a paycheck for staying at home. That's not where Ukraine is. Ukraine has the highest foreign currency reserves, almost 30 billion that they've ever had, and has growth and has industries that are really delivering. But at the same time, the country was not in a position similar to its neighbors. Some of its neighbors were spending 8 to 15% of GDP in fiscal stimulus. Ukraine was spending 3 to 4%. So the fact that the country got its house in order, and especially its macroeconomic house in order, positioned it well for this COVID-19 pandemic. We will continue to find those entrepreneurs to back them. What we do is growth equity through minority stakes primarily. Sometimes we will have a majority or control in a company, but our preference is finding those entrepreneurs, building those relationships. obviously negotiating strong exit rights, corporate governance rights, making sure that we're fully aligned before we make the investment, and then providing a great deal of value creation alongside the entrepreneur. That's our model. We don't rely on multiple arbitrage. It's all growth. We have companies that in our current portfolio that are growing over 100% a year. On average, the companies over the last 3 years have grown nearly 40% CAGR, and that's the strength of the companies that we see here. That truly for us as a house, we are leading number one in our market. We have capital, we have know-how, we have a clear model, we have already addressed the currency and macro risk by designing our investment strategy in the way that we do. And that has attracted investors, institutional investors, and international investors who have backed our funds over and over, and we continue to just expand on the relationships that we have. So at this point, we have investors with over 350 billion in capital. We've been oversubscribed in every fund. We intend to keep on pushing ourselves. We have these expressions, leave no stone unturned. We truly do. One team, one dream, focus is power. And we do that. We don't get distracted by the noise. We don't get distracted by what do people think of Ukraine today? How relevant is it for me when we're investing and backing tech entrepreneurs in an industry that has grown from when we started to invest in tech in Ukraine, 110 million, and now it's over 5 billion, projected by 2024 to grow to 15 billion. That's where we are, and that's where we're focused, and that's 60% of our investments. And the others are companies that are e-commerce, retail, that are high growth champions domestically that can outgrow any macro or currency devaluation, in particular if they're growing 80, 100%, over 100% a year. So that's the strategy. We found it to be a winning one. We don't have a lot of competition because people pick up the newspaper and say, what's happening in Ukraine, and that is what it is. We're taking full advantage of it in terms of proprietary deal flow, wealth of opportunities, finding these entrepreneurs that we want to back and work with, and then going to ultimate exits to strategics, to IPOs. We've done 17 exits in the last few years. So that's we found a winning formula, and our investors are pleased with the formula that we've adopted and pleased with the rigor to which we conform to our formula. There's no surprises. We don't go outside it. We don't start, for example, renewables. Renewables was a sector that lots of investors were piling into in Ukraine. We weren't doing renewable deals. We were very much, stick to what we had told our investors, stick to the knitting, stick to the tech, IT, the high growth, e-commerce and digital transformation sectors, and it works well for us. And we don't go anywhere where it's politicized or where it can distract us from what we've done well with and where we want to focus. So in terms of my personal views on women in private equity, women in the alternative space, to me, I want to quote a line from Hamilton that everyone's seen, which is, I want to be in the room where it happens. And I think that's it's not just a quantity, a number. No, of course I can say that Horizon has 45% of our professionals are women, or our portfolio companies, majority are female led. What's important is how many women are on the investment committees, how many women have a deciding vote, how many of them actually have that say in terms of what you're investing in, and also when you're divesting and how you're doing it. So I'm really proud that at Horizon, I've got 1 out of 3 of the votes, a third of the vote For me, it's very important, looking at kind of the stats in our industry, the Preqin stats for alternative assets, 12.2% women in senior roles. But when you start to drill deeper, it's typically women in CFO roles that make up that number, which really tells you that it's not one between 1 to 2 women. It's closer to 1 than it is to 2, and we have a long way to go in terms of making sure that women are sitting on the investment committee, women are doing the deals, women are doing the fundraising, and really have a very strong say. From my standpoint, it's really important, the demonstration of fact. It's really important to show that this is possible. I'm the first chair of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, first women female chair after 26 years. That's important to me. Being part of PWIN, which unites, as you know, a great deal of women across the alternative asset space, is extremely important to me. We did the first ever Ukraine House in Davos. It was all female. I love doing these all female teams. It makes a statement, or all female panels, or all female teams. I think ultimately what's very important is to make sure that women have the same shot at the entry positions and have the same shot for meritocracy. Our business is meritocracy. You have to perform. At the same time, you need to make sure that the pipeline of associates, the pipeline at when that door opens, that you have a 50-50 pipeline coming in, and that women and men, that they both have the ability to shine, to demonstrate meritocracy, demonstrate results, and perform at the highest caliber within the firm. If there are any blocks, you've got to remove them. And from there, let's see what happens. I think it benefits everyone to have a fair proportion in terms of men and women in this industry.